Israel's chosen deliverer was set apart before he was even born. God raised him to save his people from their enemies. He tore a lion apart with his bare hands. He struck down 1,000 men with nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. His enemies feared him, and no chain could hold him for long. But the same man who could break iron chains could not break his need to be loved by the wrong people. In the end, the greatest battle Samson fought was not against the Philistines, it was inside his own heart. This is the story of Samson, and it is not really about great strength. It is about the hidden wounds that even great strength cannot heal. This is more than an old story from the Bible. It is a story about how our greatest gift can become our greatest weakness when we stop listening to God. Israel was living under the cruel rule of the Philistines, and the people cried out for help. God had already chosen one man to break their power and bring hope to his people. But the path Samson walked would be filled with hard choices, painful mistakes, and a final act that no one could have expected. Stay until the end, because the way Samson's story ends may change the way you think about failure forever. If stories like this strengthen your faith, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next one. Now let's begin. Before Samson became the strongest man in Israel, he was a promise. At that time, the people of Israel had once again turned away from God. Because of this, the Lord allowed the Philistines to rule over them for 40 long years. Fear filled the land, and many had lost hope that freedom would ever come. In a small town lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They carried a quiet sorrow that many people could not see. They had no children, and after many years, it seemed that their prayers would never be answered. Then one ordinary day, everything changed. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife with words she never expected to hear. "You have never had a child, but you will become pregnant and give birth to a son." The promise came with a command. She was not to drink wine or any strong drink. She was not to eat anything that God had made unclean. The child growing inside her was different. He would belong to God from the moment he was born. The angel said that no razor must ever touch the boy's head. His long hair would be the sign of a Nazirite, someone set apart for God's special purpose. His life was to be holy, not because of his own greatness, but because God had chosen him. Then came the words that filled the future with hope. He will begin to save Israel from the power of the Philistines. The woman hurried to tell her husband everything that had happened. Manoah prayed that the messenger would return so they could learn how to raise the child. God answered his prayer, and the angel of the Lord came again, repeating the same instructions. Soon, the promise became real. The child was born, and they named him Samson. As he grew, the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move in his life. Israel did not know it yet, but the baby born to a once barren woman would one day shake an entire nation. Samson grew just as the angel had promised. Year after year, he became stronger than anyone around him. The Spirit of the Lord often filled him with power, and people began to see that God was with him. But strength was not the only thing growing inside Samson. So was a restless heart. He lived close to the land of the Philistines. Their cities were full of busy markets, loud feasts, and people who worshipped other gods. Israel was meant to stay separate from them, but Samson kept looking in their direction. His parents noticed the change. They had never forgotten the words of the angel. Every time they looked at their son, they remembered that he belonged to God before he even took his first breath. His mother would often remind him, "God set you apart before you could choose it yourself. Don't trade that for something smaller." Samson listened, but the words never seemed to stay with him for long. As he became a young man, his confidence grew with his strength. He had never lost a fight. He had never met a man who could stand against him. Little by little, he began to believe that his own choices could never bring him down. But the greatest dangers in life do not always come with a sword. Sometimes they begin with a desire that seems small, a step in the wrong direction, a voice that says, "Just this once." Samson was called to lead Israel away from the Philistines. Instead, he found himself drawn closer to them. The people he was meant to resist became the people he wanted to be near. No one could see where that path would end. The strongest man in Israel was walking toward a battle that no muscle could win. His greatest weakness was not waiting on a battlefield. It was already growing quietly inside his heart. One day, Samson traveled with his father and mother toward the town of Timnah. It was there that he had seen a Philistine woman he wanted to marry. His parents questioned his choice, But Samson would not change his mind. He believed he knew what was best. As they walked through the vineyards near Timnah, Samson moved ahead of his parents. For a moment, he was alone. Without warning, a young lion came rushing out, roaring as it charged toward him. There was no weapon in Samson's hand, no place to run. The lion was stronger than any man. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson with great power. Strength unlike anything he had ever known filled his body. He grabbed the lion with his bare hands and tore it apart as if it were a young goat. Just as quickly as it began, the moment was over. The lion lay dead at his feet. Samson stood there in silence, staring at what had happened. He knew he was strong, but this was different. This power had not come from him. It had come from God. Yet instead of telling his parents, he kept the whole event to himself. Perhaps he did not know how to explain it. Perhaps he did not fully understand why God had given him such strength. Or perhaps he was not ready to trust what God was doing in his life. So he said nothing. The journey continued as though nothing had happened. His parents never knew how close their son had come to death, or how powerfully God had rescued him. The lion was only the beginning. God had shown Samson that his spirit was enough to overcome any enemy. But Samson still had to learn an even greater lesson. The strength God had given him was never meant to feed his pride or satisfy his own desires. It was given to save God's people. That lesson would take much longer to learn. And the cost of learning it would be far greater than Samson could ever imagine. Samson's name soon began to spread across the land. When the time came for his wedding in Timnah, 30 Philistine men were chosen to stay with him during the feast. Samson gave them a riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. They searched for the answer but could not find it. So they threatened Samson's bride and forced her to tell them the secret. She wept until Samson finally gave in, and she passed the answer to her people. When the Philistine men solved the riddle, Samson knew they had cheated. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. He went to another Philistine town, struck down 30 men, took their clothing, and gave the garments to those who had answered the riddle. Then he left in burning anger. The trouble did not end there. Later, Samson returned for his wife, only to learn that she had been given to another man. Hurt and filled with rage, he caught hundreds of foxes, tied them together in pairs, fastened burning torches to their tails, and sent them running through the Philistines' grain fields, vineyards, and olive trees. Their harvest went up in flames. The Philistines answered with more violence. Samson answered with even greater force. Before long, an army came looking for him. Even some men of Judah were afraid and handed Samson over, tied with 2 new ropes. But as the Philistines rushed toward him, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him once more. The ropes fell from his arms like burned thread. Looking around, Samson found the fresh jawbone of a donkey lying on the ground. With that simple bone in his hand, he struck down 1,000 men. The people could hardly believe what they had seen. Stories of Samson's victories spread across Israel and filled the Philistines with fear. No army seemed able to stop him. No chain could hold him. No enemy could stand before him. But while others looked at Samson with wonder, something dangerous was growing inside him. Victory after victory made him feel untouchable. Instead of drawing closer to God, he wandered deeper into Philistine land. And once again, his eyes turned toward the very people he had been called to resist. After many victories, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah. She lived in the valley of Sorek, close to the Philistines. The rulers of the Philistines saw their chance at last. They came to Delilah with a secret offer. "Find out where his great strength comes from," they said. "Learn how we can overpower him, and each of us will give you a great reward." Delilah agreed. Again and again, she asked Samson the same question. "What makes you so strong? How could someone tie you up and defeat you?" Samson smiled and gave her a false answer. "If they tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings, I will become as weak as any other man." That night, she did exactly as he had described. Philistine soldiers waited nearby, ready to capture him. "Samson, the Philistines are here." He snapped the bowstrings as easily as a thread touched by fire. But he did not leave. Delilah asked again, and Samson told another lie. "If they tie me with new ropes, I will lose my strength." Once more, she tested him. Once more, he broke free without effort. Still, he stayed. A third time she pleaded with him, and a third time he gave another false answer. Again, the trap failed. By now, the pattern was impossible to miss. Every question led to another trap. Every lie was followed by another attack. The danger stood right in front of him. Deep inside, Samson knew something was wrong. The warning did not come with thunder or fire. It came quietly, like a voice in his own heart asking, "Why are you still here?" He could have walked away. He could have remembered the calling God had placed on his life before he was born. He could have listened to the warning. Instead, he stayed. He believed he was too strong to be defeated. He had escaped every trap before, so he expected this one to end the same way. But each lie brought him closer to the truth. Each step pulled him nearer to the moment that would change his life forever. The strongest man in Israel was not being defeated by chains or swords. He was being defeated by the choice to ignore every warning God had placed in his path. Day after day, Delilah would not stop asking. She questioned Samson again and again. She cried. She complained. She told him that if he really loved her, he would not keep secrets from her. Each day, the pressure grew heavier. The man who had stood against lions, armies, and giants of fear slowly grew tired of the battle inside his own home. At last, Samson gave up. He told her everything. "No razor has ever touched my head," he said. "I have been set apart to God since before I was born. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become as weak as any other man." This time, Delilah knew he had spoken the truth. She sent for the Philistine rulers. As Samson rested with his head in her lap, he fell asleep. Quietly, a man came in and shaved off the 7 locks of his hair. Little by little, his strength left him. Then Delilah cried out, "Samson, the Philistines are here." Samson opened his eyes. He stood up, expecting the same ending as every time before. He thought, "I will go out as before and shake myself free." He believed nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The strength that had always rushed over him did not come. His hands felt empty. His body felt weak. For the first time in his life, Samson reached for power that was no longer there. He did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines rushed in and seized him with ease. The man they had feared for years could no longer resist them. They bound him with bronze chains. They put out his eyes. The mighty judge of Israel was led away like a helpless prisoner to grind grain in a prison. The man who once walked in the light now lived in darkness. The man who had broken every chain was now wearing them. And the saddest part of all was not that Samson had lost his hair. It was that he had lost the presence of the God who had given him his strength, and he did not even know it until it was gone. The Philistines celebrated as if they had defeated Israel's God. The man who had once made whole armies run now stumbled through the streets in chains. They mocked him, laughed at him, and treated him like a trophy. The judge who had been raised up to save God's people had become a slave in the land of their enemies. They forced Samson into prison. His eyes were gone. Bronze shackles held his hands and feet. Day after day, he walked in circles, pushing the heavy millstone as he ground grain for the very people he had fought for so many years. The strongest man in Israel had been brought lower than he had ever imagined. There were no crowds cheering his victories now. No songs were sung about his strength. Only the sound of grinding stone filled the darkness. With nothing left to distract him, Samson was finally alone with his thoughts. He remembered the angel's promise before he was born. He remembered his mother's words. God set you apart before you could choose it yourself. Don't trade that for something smaller. Now those words echoed through the darkness. In the silence of his prison, Samson cried out to God, "Lord, why did you set me apart if I was only going to fall this far? Why was I chosen, only to be broken like this?" No answer came at once, only silence. But God had not forgotten the man he had called. While Samson walked in darkness, something small was happening that no one seemed to notice. His hair began to grow again. Each passing day brought another strand. The Philistines laughed because they saw only a defeated prisoner. They thought the story was over. But God was quietly writing another ending. Samson's hair was never the true source of his strength. It was the sign of a promise God had made long before Samson could speak, walk, or fight. And as that sign slowly returned, so did the reminder that God's calling had not been erased by Samson's failure. The chains were still there. The prison was still dark. But hope had begun to grow again, one strand at a time. The day finally came when the Philistine rulers gathered to celebrate. Thousands of people filled the great temple of their false god. They praised him, saying he had given Samson into their hands. Music filled the air. Laughter echoed through the crowd. Then they called for Samson. Blind and weak, he was led into the temple so they could make fun of him. A young servant guided him by the hand. "Put me where I can feel the pillars that hold up the building," Samson said. The boy led him to the center of the temple. For the first time in many years, Samson did not trust in his own strength. He bowed his head and prayed, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please give me strength just one more time. Not so I can be honored, but so I may finish the work you gave me to do." It was not the proud prayer of a man who thought he could never fall. It was the humble prayer of a broken man who had finally learned where true strength comes from. Samson placed one hand on each pillar. He pushed with all the strength God gave him. The great temple shook. The pillars cracked. Then the whole building came crashing down. The rulers of the Philistines, along with thousands of people inside, were buried beneath the stones. In his death, Samson struck a greater blow against Israel's enemies than he had during all the years of his life. Later, his family came and carried his body home. They buried him in the tomb of his father, Manoah. Samson had judged Israel for 20 years, and though his story ended in sacrifice, God had still used him to begin Israel's deliverance. His mother had once told him, "God set you apart before you could choose it yourself. Don't trade that for something smaller." For a time, Samson forgot those words. But in the end, he chose them back. His story reminds us that failure does not have to be the final chapter. Even after our worst mistakes, God can still use a heart that turns back to Him. The calling on your life can survive your failure when you return to the one who calls you. If this story encourages your faith, please subscribe and join us for more powerful journeys through the Bible.